You ever wondered what the entire wire harness out of a Super Duty looks like? Well, this is it. This is the entire harness, the engine, the chassis, the cab, everything. We're gonna be using the HP tuners, MPV 12 I think that's what it's called. Future video, I'm gonna be laying this harness out and trying to figure out what's what. I'm sure a lot of it's unnecessary, but from what I hear, every single component needs to be here, at least initially, for the computer to recognize it. So, I mean, I've even got the seat belts that have been deployed and locked out in case I need this plug. Like, I've got everything. I've got the blown up dash airbag. I've got the whole steering column. So we've got everything. We've got the entire navigation system and all the individual modules. There's a bunch of them. There's more attached to the harness still. I tried to leave everything plugged in that I could, just so I knew where it went. Because a lot of the plugs, yeah, they all look the same for the most part. So, I know everyone's been curious as to what the entire wire harness looks like laid out on the table. It's pretty heavy. I'd say that whole harness is like at least 80 pounds. Insane. So, this video this week is going to be basically, I have over 15,000 pictures and videos in my photo library on my phone, just because I take pictures of everything. It's always nice to be able to look back and see that. Oh, rambling on. Okay, so yeah, so this video is going to be the T-Wagon. It's a 1985 Mercedes 300 TD, 3-liter turbo diesel. So basically what happened here, I think I'm gonna try to do a voiceover. I don't know how that works. I'm learning all this, so you guys get to learn with me maybe, or just laugh at me as I try to learn. Basically, the solenoid on the starter, I fried it because I was too lazy to put a block heater on it, and it's being an IDI, it really doesn't like cold, so you gotta crank it forever, and I fried the thing. So I bought a new starter, and I don't know if you've ever changed a starter on one of these older Mercedes, but it's massive. I've got it around here somewhere. Actually, I got pictures of it. You'll see it in the pictures. So I bought a new starter. I get it, and I'm like, wow, this thing is massive, because I haven't seen the old one yet, because there's the turbo and the manifold and everything's in the way, and the exhaust and the intake are on the same side. So they're stacked on top of each other, so it's a cluster. So I ended up, in my mind, which, yeah, we all know how that goes. I thought, okay, I'll just pull the turbo and everything off so I can get to the starter. It'll make it a lot easier, which it did. But that led to me going, you know what? This is just a standard T3 flange. I have a HX130 laying around. I have a rebuild kit for it. Let's slap that on there. So it's not as simple as just slap it on. There's all kinds of stuff that needs to go into modifying that manifold. The intake manifold specifically. It was a non-intercooled engine, so they just took the compressor housing and dumped it right into the intake. So trying to fit something else in there and clock it to where you can plumb it is a nightmare. So you'll see, I'll take you through that whole process. Enjoy. Let me know what you think. Thank you guys. See you later. All right, so this cold start here was actually after all the craziness you're about to witness. So at this point, it already has a block heater on it. So first thing I did was pull the intake and exhaust manifolds off to get access to the starter, and that's when I noticed that the turbo actually mounted with just a standard flange. Now, this turbo is actually from, I believe, an early 90s Cummins, which makes sense if you think about it, because I'm pretty sure Mercedes and Cummins use the same engineers, because this thing has oil everywhere. So the new starter showed up, and for some reason the mounts were completely opposite of each other. That's when my mind immediately went, okay, let's tear these apart and make one good one. Not, hey, this is wrong, send it back, get the correct one. After test fitting the manifolds with the bigger turbo, it was apparent that the larger compressor housing wasn't going to clear the intake manifold. Here you can see just how much bigger the compressor housing is on the Holset turbo compared to the factory turbo. So I had to add a spacer to the turbo mounting flange. I decided to use the original downpipe and exhaust, so I just welded a V-band flange to the factory turbo outlet flange. So by doing that, I was able to adapt it to the adapter on the Holset turbine housing and keep the original exhaust mounting position. I did all the powder coating when I was at American Race Cars. Yes, I did it after hours, of course. So I went with this color by Prismatic Powders called Illusion Smurf. I did away with the factory hardline oil feed and went with this stainless braided line so that I could relocate it to where the new Holset turbo is sitting. Alright, see where the outlet on the compressor housing is? That's as close as I was able to clock it before the actual scroll part of the housing hit the exhaust manifold. So that obviously meant I had to hack up the intake manifold and make it work. This also allowed me to get rid of the factory EGR system, where they actually just took exhaust gas and dumped it straight into the intake. It was controlled by a valve, but had no cooler whatsoever. Yeah, so after cutting the flanges off the original intake, I started building it up with weld and profiling it how I wanted to try and make it look somewhat not all hacked up. I was using a carbide burr to shape everything and somehow launched a sliver of aluminum right up under my safety glasses, right into my eye. I'm pretty sure it was the exhaust from the die grinder that blew it up under there, but anyway, yeah. Off to the ER to get it dug out. So as I was shaping the intake, I was using a piece of tubing to gauge how much and where to build it up. After it was close to what I wanted and I knew it was going to clear the compressor housing, I took a piece of 1/8" plate and I rolled it into a tube. The one I started with was very thin and I just didn't trust it to be a permanent part of my manifold. After one last test fit with the new tube, it was time to glue it all up and powder coat it to match. So when you have access to a spray booth and an oven, you just powder coat everything, because why not, right? But sometimes you powder coat things just a little too early. So here I just pressed the ball end of a ball peen hammer into a piece of tubing to flare it out to match the factory style drain. This just sat on top of a tube that's sealed with an O-ring and drained directly into the upper oil pan. So as you could see, it was a super tight fit, so I had to grind on the nut on that fitting to get it to clear the V-band clamp on the compressor housing. I wanted the EGT probe in the middle of the flange area, so I just eyeballed center, and I actually hit dead center on the divider of the spacer. I had to drill the hole out bigger and weld a bung in place so that I could reposition the probe. Here I'm just checking for leaks and any potential issues, and yeah, I may have put way too much assembly lube in there. So when I got this turbo, I didn't know the history on it at all, so I chose to rebuild it. I could tell it had some wear because it looked like the compressor wheel may have touched the housing at some point. So when I tore it apart, the thrust plate looked pretty worn, so I just assumed that was the issue and slapped it on after I rebuilt it. Turns out I actually had a Pratt & Whitney EGR delete kit and didn't even know it. After verifying there were no issues, I got started on the plumbing. Now, keep in mind, as I was doing this, I fully intended on this being temporary. So whenever I'm working in a tight space like this, I like to set my phone up and use it to help me check the fitment. So I loosely installed this section and then closed the hood, and then I watched the playback to see if it moved at all, and then I could just reposition it as needed. You can kind of eyeball across the hood line to see if it's going to clear, but the phone method ensures that it's not going to leave a dent in your hood. So yeah, if it hits, you just kind of reposition it and check it again. Then it's just a lot of cutting and checking until you get the layout you're looking for. So like I said, this setup was supposed to be temporary. I had planned on running a water to air intercooler. I wanted to mount it kind of over the turbo, back like in the downpipe area. And then just run the heat exchanger up front and everything else that's required. Maybe we'll revisit this as a future project. I'm not sure, but yeah. Anyway, so it ended up being a, you know, like a temporarily permanent setup. So once all the plumbing was done, I checked for any leaks. It's time for a test drive. Now when this whole thing started, all I wanted out of this setup was to hear the turbo. That's it. I didn't care about performance whatsoever. Just turbo whistle, that's it. So yeah, like I was saying, took it out for a test drive, and as soon as it started to build boost, I can hear some bald eagles screaming, and not in the good way. Right away I knew it was the compressor wheel touching the housing, so turned around, pulled it back in my shop. Now this ended up being a blessing in disguise, because once I got it in the shop and got out and looked, I had a trail of oil following me. So my turbo drain didn't quite work right. So I immediately got on the Facebook Marketplace, which I do not recommend doing, because for some reason every time I do, I end up buying something even if I'm not looking for anything. Yeah, so I got on there to find another WH1C turbo, and I actually found one, and it was super cheap. Got it back and disassembled it and got it all cleaned up. I ended up taking both of them apart and using the best parts out of both to make one good turbo. And that's when I realized that it was actually the turbine shaft that was worn in the first one. So it was never gonna work anyway. So while I had the turbo out, I reconfigured the oil drain. Once everything was back in working order, the only logical next step was to make a 3-inch stainless downpipe that turned out at the passenger door, because turbo noises. I also added another EGT probe to monitor post-turbine temperature, because I had a dual pyrometer and I figured, why not? So I know it seems like I'm just like randomly all over the place with this, but the only reason you think that is because I am. So, you know, I get super focused on a particular section and I do as much as I can, and then before I know it, I'm working on something else. So this just follows the order in which I did things. So after driving around with this setup for a couple months, I decided I needed to add a muffler. It was just way too loud. I really liked it, but it was louder than I expected. So yeah, I don't really recommend it. I'm sure nobody noticed this unless you're as crazy as I am, in which case you're awesome. But this actually is not the valve cover that I had in the beginning. I found this one on eBay, and it actually had a threaded insert in a metal oil cap. Prior to starting this project, I had already installed a boost gauge. This allowed me to monitor and limit boost manually, because there was no form of boost control on this setup at this time. But that gets old quick, so I came up with a simple way to run a blow-off valve. So you may or may not know this, but diesel engines don't have a throttle body. Well, okay, no, we won't get into that right now. So they don't create vacuum, which you would normally need to control a blow-off valve. So what I did to make this setup work was I used a pressure switch that I had set to 11 PSI. Now this is a normally open switch, so once boost pressure hits 11 PSI, it closes the circuit and then it supplies power to a pneumatic solenoid. That solenoid then diverts boost pressure off of the top of the blow-off valve's diaphragm, allowing boost pressure to push the valve open. So any pressure below 11 PSI is supplied to the top of the diaphragm, and that helps the internal spring hold the valve closed. This happens regardless of throttle position to ensure that there is absolutely no way I could accidentally overboost the engine. And yes, I know that's what the wastegate's for, is for boost control, but I'm pretty sure this setup in a Cummins engine, the gate doesn't start to open till like 30 PSI, so that wasn't gonna work. So to try to make it work, I actually stacked springs outside of the actuator to offset the internal spring pressure, and then I adjusted it to start opening around 10 PSI. But I didn't 100% trust that setup, so I came up with this blow-off valve idea, and it's been working flawlessly. And yeah, that's how you change the starter on a 1985 Mercedes 300 TD. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks, guys. Hey, good morning everyone. I just want to take a quick second to thank you guys for checking out my channel. Especially wanted to thank everybody that subscribed. Yeah, I really appreciate all your guys' support. It's really helping motivate me to keep going with this. Cannot thank you enough. So I know this is my second video now, and I should probably have this editing thing figured out by now, but as you could tell, it's allowing me to be pretty creative with my ideas. So the first couple videos might be a little bit different, but we'll establish a good, you know, theme, I guess, and maybe stick with that. So any feedback you have is much appreciated. All right, and I just wanted to throw this out there real quick. So if you noticed, my face is a little bit red. So I recently found out I have sleep apnea, and that's why I'm always tired all day, every day, no matter how much I sleep. So basically, I gotta strap a tube to my face when I sleep, and that force feeds air down my nostril holes into my lungs so that I breathe when I'm sleeping. And I think it's helpful so far. He said it. So thanks a lot, guys. Yeah. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next one. Too many hand things. Too many hands. All right, thanks a lot, guys.